Guys, welcome to Lessons from the Legends once again. We're going through the 100 greatest martial artists of all time, the 100 greatest fighters of all time. That means all striking sports are fair game. And we're starting off with boxers from the start of the Marquess of Queensberry rules coming in the late 1800s and going through all the way to present day, incorporating great boxers, great mixed martial artists, and great kickboxers along the way, because we have so much we can learn from them. And it's been so much fun to go through in a chronological order with these great, amazing fighters. So this time we have the Michigan assassin, Stanley Ketchel. For the love of God, please look into this guy's life story. Absolutely amazing. He was murdered just after his 24th birthday. Frankly, with the way he lived his life and his mindset, it's kind of a miracle he made it that long. But we're so happy that we did as boxing fans, because this guy, one of the greatest welterweights and middleweights of all time, and even for his very short lifespan, achieved so much. He was a multiple time, he won the World Welterweight Championship. He was a multiple time World Middleweight Championship after having this amazing series with another cowboy from the Wild West in Billy Papke. He ended up winning, they had a 4-fight series. Papke knocked out Ketchel in the second fight. Ketchel came back to win the title back off him in the third. And then he obviously went to light heavyweight, beat a very experienced, very good light heavyweight in Philadelphia, Jack O'Brien, who had challenged for the World Heavyweight Championship as well, a couple of times. And then he went on to challenge the World Heavyweight Champion at the time, a man who's I've briefly mentioned before, and will do his own. He will be one of the 100 legends as well. The first ever African-American heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson. And this fight was famously staged. The two of them were both absolutely wild. They both loved to gamble, loved to drink, loved to party, and loved to go against the grain. And they kind of were both kindred spirits who sort of found each other. And both just happened to be two of the best pound-for-pound boxers in the world at the time. And because no heavyweight looked like they were going to be a match for Jack Johnson at all in 1909, they decided, well, let's get the middleweight, who has just beaten a great light heavyweight twice in Philadelphia, Jack O'Brien. Let's put Stanley Ketchel in there, because Lord knows Ketchel can punch like he has bricks for hands, and at the very least we can definitely sell it on that this guy is a dangerous puncher. He is one of the all-time great knockout artists in boxing history, and I want to show you how he did it, because he certainly started off as a great puncher as well, but he would still get beaten. He'd still get beaten by better boxers who knew how to counter him. And essentially, even when he got really, really good, by the time he fought Johnson, he'd won his welterweight title. He had won, lost, and won again the world middleweight title, and then obviously beat Jack O'Brien twice, who was a great light heavyweight. And by the time he got on there with Johnson, they staged a fight. Johnson was winning on points because they weren't really going too hard. And then somewhere in there, I think it was the 11th round, Stanley decided, okay, I'm going to let rip with one here. Stanley decided to you got to see the footage of this, it's fantastic. Stanley launches this overhand right straight from the depths of hell and drops Jack Johnson. And Jack Johnson goes down to his hands and knees. And you can see him kind of like he's down there, but he kind of gets back up. And you almost see like the look on his face like, all right, I get it now. You're going to pay for that. And immediately Johnson just explodes and knocks out Stanley Ketchel into another orbit. It's literally that quick. There is, I don't know, what is there? From the time Johnson gets back to his feet, the time Stanley Ketchel is unconscious on the ground, I mean, is it 2 seconds has passed? And Johnson basically, I think the final punch he lands, he just launches a flurry of a combo. I think the final punch he lands is a big uppercut, and he gets up having to wipe teeth from Stanley Ketchel out of his glove because they're embedded into his glove. And poor Stanley is knocked out cold after that. But then Stanley does recover. He sort of goes back to middleweight and takes on a guy who I talked about in my last video as being, in my opinion, one of the 3 greatest pound-for-pound boxers of all time, Sam Langford. So life doesn't get any easier for Stanley Ketchel as far as his incredible resume goes. But he ends up fighting a 6-round decision with Sam Langford, which was kind of believed to be a bit of a warm-up fight to like a longer fight between two guys who really are, even at the time, were like two of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters the world had ever seen in the very short history of boxing. And still are, in my opinion. And shortly after that, he has one more fight, and then shortly after that, he's murdered. But Stanley was, a frightening knockout puncher, and we've got to get. There's so much to cover. I mean, his life away from the ring is amazing too, but we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about getting a lesson from Stanley Ketchel, and the biggest one is how to counter the counter fighter. It's talking about like how the last video we talked about Sam Langford, how it's easier to hit your opponent once they initiate, and you can counter them. So you can avoid their punch, counter them, and often you can do it simultaneously as they throw their punch. So if you get stuck in this situation of like, oh, every time I try to initiate, which Stanley Ketchel is a guy who initiates he will throw first. He's more than happy to. But he was taking on guys who actually had good timing, actually could avoid his first punch and slip and counter with their own. So how did Stanley get around this? So the next level of the fighting strategy is then you need to start feinting. So the key is you have to start feinting, so then they don't know what to counter. So they'll start then, so that you throw a serious punch. Then they're thinking in their head, okay, I know I can counter that next time they do it. Once they start countering it, then you feint that same punch. They then throw their counter, and you can then counter their counter. And this is kind of how boxing goes. There's like different levels to this little like bluffing match. And then they will start all of a sudden becoming very wary of just countering your first shot. So say if you were to throw a jab, they counter your jab by slipping to the outside and throwing their jab straight through the center, just like we talked about with the last video with Sam Langford, as he loved to do. So if they start doing that, then you can feint your jab. They will then throw their counter jab, and now all of a sudden their position is compromised. They've thrown the jab. You can then avoid their jab, and if you wanted to, you can literally just slip to the outside of their jab and throw their jab across, or you can go for something a bit more devastating as well. You can throw your right hand over the top of their jab. You can throw your left hook as well. You're still slipping to the outside, but instead of throwing just the straight, you're also coming around with a hook. If they've really committed to that sort of stepping in counter jab, that's a really good option. So essentially learning to feint and then draw out their counter and then counter that counter is the way that Stanley Ketchel sort of went from being a knockout brawler who was good enough to actually be a decent middleweight to multiple time world champion and multiple weight classes, and to a guy who people thought might actually be able to beat Jack Johnson, the much bigger and very, very good heavyweight Jack Johnson. And then went 6 rounds with a guy who, again, top 3 boxer of all time, in my opinion, Sam Langford. It's very, very impressive. And that's sort of how he got to that next level where he could be an absolute star of world boxing for a good 5 or 6 years then before he was murdered. So little lesson there from, again, one of the greatest boxers in history, and something we'll elaborate on later on, because as boxing is a chess match, and this is where we're really starting to talk about like boxing and martial arts as well as being at a higher level against other people who are trained, it does become a chess match. Often that like first layer of strategy of just countering their first shot, avoiding their first shot and countering it at the same time is often enough. But once people get really good, then you need to start incorporating more strategies to it. So, yeah, again, learning to incorporate feinting into their game, so then they will counter and then you can counter their counter, is the next level of strategy to get into with boxing, and it opens up a world of possibilities. So we'll end it there with one of the most interesting characters in boxing history, and pound for pound, again, one of the best knockout punchers of all time. The fearsome former world welterweight and 2-time world middleweight champion. And he did it all before he was murdered just after his 24th birthday, the Michigan assassin Stanley Ketchel.